Welcome into Unpaid Interns. It is Wednesday afternoon, November 18th, as it gets closer and closer. The big matchup, Indiana taking on Ohio State this weekend on Saturday. But before we return to talk about some Big Ten football, wanted to shift our attention to the West Coast. Pac-12 football is back, and as a California native, I always enjoy talking Pac-12 football. And I've got a California native, and now the that's hard to say. Cronkite sports reporter for Arizona State football, Gareth Kwok, joining me from Phoenix. Gareth, how you doing today?
Doing good, man. Thanks for bringing me on. It's been a bit since I last saw you over the summer. We were back in Northern California, of course, but I'm happy to be talking a little bit, some Pac-12, some Arizona State football. Thanks for bringing me on.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you. And the thing I get coming to the Midwest, I try talking Pac-12 football and people make fun of me and say it's not a real conference. Just from the first 2 weeks of Pac-12 football, what I've watched, and especially looking at the Big Ten, which is struggling with its depth this year, the ACC is not deep, and the SEC as well at the bottom of the conference, not very good. Can you make the argument that the Pac-12 is the deepest conference this year in college football?
Yeah, I mean, I think you got, top to bottom teams that have been competitive, and I think you sort of touched upon it as far as the past couple of weekends where you've seen some teams like a Colorado or UCLA that you thought at the beginning of the season weren't going to do a whole lot, and here they are. Colorado, they're 2-0 right now. UCLA with a very convincing victory this past weekend. The Sunday morning kickoff, that was kind of something to see there against Cal. But the competition has been, I think, a lot better than people I think, and I think also, of course, the conference has had its issues right now with the coronavirus and just with contact tracing and how that's gone. But I think you make a pretty good point, Griffin, just as far as the talent and the depth of this conference and how it's sort of slept on a little bit right now. But it's been quite a fun past 2 weekends to see.
I'm going to get some hate out here in the Midwest for saying that the Pac-12 is the deepest conference in college football, but I think you can make a good case. But the one issue is—
you got to own the argument, Griffin. You got to own it.
I'm trying to, but I was doing the IU Michigan broadcast a couple of weeks ago and was talking to our color guy, or our studio host, who's a big guy, ref guy, knows all the refs in the whole country. Asked him who his favorite Pac-12 ref was. He said he wouldn't give me a name because he didn't believe it was a real college football conference. So people here, they're demeaning. They're demeaning. It hurts. Anyways, the one issue, as we were talking about before with the Pac-12, has been the COVID-19 situation. You cover Arizona State. They had their season opener, a heartbreaker against USC, and their game canceled last week. Their game against not Colorado. Was it Colorado this coming Saturday? Cal this coming Saturday.
Cal this Saturday, yeah.
Both the game last week, game this coming week canceled. What's the situation there with COVID-19? How does their season go forward right now?
Yeah, so it was, I think, about last Wednesday or so where there were some sort of reports, I think, first off, it was, a lot of people thought it was going to be Cal, right? That was sort of the team in question because they had that, asymptomatic case that knocked them out their first game against, I think it was against Washington that first weekend. So it was like, okay, well, what's the situation with Cal? What's the situation with the city of Berkeley? But then I think, there were reports that came out that Arizona State had to cancel practice on Thursday, and it was something related to COVID-19. And so with Arizona State, their policies with privacy, they weren't going to release a whole lot of information, but it ended up, being that Arizona State, they could not field the team themselves, and that they had an outbreak themselves, and that knocked them out. And, they had to be declared a no contest for this past Saturday against Cal. And that was going to be Arizona State's first home game of the season. So that was sort of one thing. And, as reports and sort of developments, some of the insiders are getting in on the scoop where really it's a lot bigger of an outbreak than I think people had thought. And that I think there are reports that, that one side of the ball's knocked out, like it's because of contact tracing and of the coronavirus. So, yeah, and that led to this next game for this next Saturday against Colorado here on, I believe, the 21st or so. That one also getting canceled as early as this past Sunday. So it's been, a lot of whirlwind right now at Arizona State. We've had no media availability recently. The program's basically put on pause right now until they can just sort of recover. Head coach Herm Edwards was one who contracted the virus, and he said that he's doing okay right now. But yeah, it's Arizona State is sort of the latest team right now to be hit with the virus after just playing one game, which is gonna really hurt their overall season. I think as you go down towards the end of this year.
Yeah, and I guess the question I was wondering, and you look at their schedule, I mean, they only have 3 games now left, and then that Pac-12 Champions Week. I mean, is it worth it to play the season? What do you get out from playing the season at this point when you're, 4 games is normally that's a third of your schedule in a normal year?
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point, but I think, I think as far as the conference goes, and I think for Arizona State, it really is right now at this point trying to almost get to like the finish line basically, and just try and get some sort of games in any way, shape, or form. I think for Arizona State, I mean, you have these, of course, you want to be competitive and play in the playoffs and these meaningful bowl games, but I think right now with the way that I don't think the conference could have expected as far as that first weekend where they had already 2 cancellations, and now you had more cancellations this past weekend, and now Arizona State, they're going to miss this weekend. I mean, really, it's sort of up in the air, right? So I think it's just as far as trying to get in some games, trying to play some sort of football, and really honestly kind of look ahead to next year with the way that this year is just not what the conference had in mind. So it's really just trying to make sure everybody is healthy. I think Arizona State, they're trying to make sure everybody's healthy, get some games in, get a little bit of a glimpse in, and honestly probably just look to next year where hopefully, fingers crossed, right? Just things are sort of normal and we can come back to some sort of normalcy in college football as a whole.
Absolutely. The one game that Arizona State did play got some national attention, not just for USC's stunning comeback, but also for the time the game was played at, 9 a.m. in the morning in Los Angeles. What was the experience for you covering the game? I know it was 10 o'clock in Phoenix, and for Arizona State fans waking up, and how did you feel like that affected the game, playing a game at 9 a.m. in the morning? I mean, when IU plays games at noon, it's early for me to wake up.
That's funny because I was in the studio helping out with like a little pregame, postgame show. So we were watching, or I was watching the game sort of through our studio, you could say. Not traditionally, maybe from my apartment and my home couch or so, but I think the 9 a.m. kickoff was honestly I really liked it a lot, and I think Joel Klatt on the broadcast for Fox was saying this too, but for a conference that really needs this type of national exposure and all that, I think that kickoff was great. I mean, Arizona State, USC, the game was a great game. It came down to the last second, and USC clutched it out. But I mean, if you're talking about an entertainment standpoint, if you're talking about seeing some of the 2 best quarterbacks in the conference, Jaden Daniels of the Sun Devils and Keaton Slovis of the Trojans, I mean, I think that for East Coasters and for those that are watching Big Noon, I think that hopefully got them to watch and be able to see what the Pac-12 is all about. And for a program like Arizona State, get them some national exposure, get some attention to a program that typically hasn't gone yet. So I would say that I hope Pac-12 could maybe explore this down the road, because I think it really was a great idea, and I think it'll be determined to see how they kind of continue that, and maybe they do it for next year or so. But I think it was really fun to watch some early morning football, and I'm sure from a media standpoint it was nice just to sort of get it over with and not have to do the night game and stay up in the press box up until maybe 1 or 2 in the morning. So I think that was also an added benefit, you could say.
I guess the one thing I'm thinking, because you're talking about night games, and of course Arizona State in September has to play all their games at night. You could maybe play a game at 9 a.m. just because it would be cooler because you're in the desert. I guess with that in mind, if fans are back next year, would fans show up to a 9 a.m. game? Because obviously there weren't any fans in Los Angeles when they played that game.
Yeah, and that's a good point that you make as far as the fans, right? And I think that's probably a reason why they could be flexible with that scheduling as far as that. The players, I know head coach Herm Edwards in the press conferences, they were saying, he was telling his players that it was a 4:45, I want to say, in the morning, mealtime for breakfast. I mean, that is really, really early, to say the least for him. I mean, not for Herm. Herm can get up anytime he wants. He's bright and early, but for those players, I'm sure, they've had to catch up on their sleep. But yeah, I think from a fan standpoint, that's interesting to see. I think, 9 a.m., or at least it would be, I guess, 10 a.m. Here in Arizona. It would be pretty early for those fans, and so, but I think they could, they could adapt, they could get used to it. I know for students that might be a little bit tough, of course, on a Saturday, but I think from, if you think about it just from an exposure standpoint and trying to make sure this program and trying to promote it, I mean, I think the early kickoff time does wonders, really.
Is it cool enough in Phoenix at 9 a.m. in September that you could play that game without it, by it finishing being 105 degrees, which is a problem with sports in the summer in Arizona?
Yeah, I know it's still pretty it's still very, very hot in September, as you said. It can be, still 99 to 100 in the mornings, which, yeah, and I think that's a good point, is if once it gets into, if it's a noon or so, once it's to like the fourth quarter of a game, I mean, if the weather is just going to only get hotter and drier, right? So I think maybe it would be more logical, I'd say, I guess, to do if it was more of like a October or so, November, right? As far as the weather's going to cool down, and the players will be a little bit more back in shape and everything. So I think that might be a little bit more, feasible. But of course, the conference games, depending if, there are non-conference games again back in the next year, then, the conference games, the marquee matchups, the games that people want to see, then those will be, fittingly in October, November. And those are the ones that, fans will want to see for a big noon kickoff potentially.
Because I guess the problem with Arizona State getting on that national level in September, you're playing a home game. It has to be at 10 o'clock at night on the East Coast, or even later. I mean, the Oregon State-Washington game started at 11 o'clock at night here on the East Coast. I'm not going to stay up till 3 a.m. and watch it. But anyways, one last question for you on Arizona State. I mean, similar to a program here in Bloomington like Indiana that's been on the rise, I felt like we've seen that with Herm Edwards coming into the program, changing some things. They had that big win over Oregon on primetime last year in November. Once things return to normal, is this a program that can compete for a Pac-12 championship and maybe, make a run towards a Rose Bowl or college football playoff?
Yeah, no, this is a team that, I mean, I think it was unfortunate that the outbreak happened, so early, but, if you take away this, the virus and all that, and if you just sort of had a normal season, but this team really could be a good Pac-12 South title, contender, and potentially in the running for a Pac-12 championship. Jaden Daniels is a special quarterback. And I mean, if, freshman year, if you got to see him, he was just a freshman and he was putting up some great numbers as far as, the interceptions were low. He was really dynamic with the legs, and he had, good weapons as well. And so for Daniels and for him, this is his team. The Arizona State also getting a new offensive coordinator to kind of spice things up on offense. And so I think this was the year that a lot of people were saying that this could be the year that they really make a run for it, as far as the South title, as far as potentially getting to the Pac-12 championship. USC would be really kind of their only main contender, you could say, as far as in the South. But I mean, if you put all the pieces together and what Herm Edwards has done these past couple of years here in Tempe, he's done an amazing job to really turn the program around and make it relevant and make Sun Devil fans really excited about it. And so, it is sort of unfortunate about, the outbreak that happened. And this was a team that really took, they stated the importance of how, trying to mitigate the virus, mitigate the spread. And, it only takes one or so in contact tracing. So I don't know. It will be interesting to see how they sort of play it out and finish it off. But yeah, when healthy, this is a team that really could have been dangerous, really.
Wanted to look at the Pac-12 from a wider perspective, and the conference favorite this year, Oregon. Do you think they're a team that can run the table where they haven't been able to do that the last few years? And I guess the question is, if they run the table with the short schedule, only 8 wins, would they make the college football playoff, and should they make the college football playoff?
Yeah, we've seen we saw this past weekend against Washington State. Wasn't their prettiest victory, right? But they still got the job done, and their quarterback Tyler Shuck has done a pretty good job so far in the past couple of starts, to say. But I think, yeah, Oregon is right now the best team right now in the Pac-12. I think USC is second right now. USC has had really some nail biter, games that they probably should have lost, but they got lucky and they were able to go 2-0. But I think Oregon is a team right now that I think they're sort of in the borderline top 10. I'm not sure about, a playoff or so. I think, with the way their schedule is and how they basically have to run the table, as you said, they got to win by a lot. I think they have to really show the committee that this is a really dominant team, which I don't think they have shown quite just yet. And it hurts that they're getting the late sort of start as far as in the schedule, starting here in November compared to other conferences around the country. So, but this is a team that always, you can never really count them out. They head coach Mario Cristobal has done his thing with his team and with his guys. So they're always going to be in the conversation. It's probably early to tell whether they can really make the playoff right now with the limited sample size we've seen, but Oregon's a team right now that you can say probably with full confidence that they're the best right now in the Pac-12.
The Pac-12 has undoubtedly been the conference that has struggled the most to get a team into the college football playoff. In fact, it's only happened twice in now 5 years of the playoff. Oregon in 2015 and then Washington, I think that was 2017. So it's been 3 years since we've even seen a Pac-12 team in the playoff. Why has that been so much of a struggle, do you think, from the conference as someone that's reported in it to get someone to that biggest stage?
Yeah, and that's a good question that you bring up. And I think it's something as far as, this, I think exposure could play a role as well, as far as, the game times being late. Not a lot of people get to see kind of what Oregon or what these other teams are all about. But, it's tough, right? You've seen just a lot of these sort of SEC schools, ACC, Clemson, just sort of dominate in the college football playoff. And it's just the Pac-12 trying to break through. And I think, the commissioner, Larry Scott, was even, detailing this past year about, trying to delay the college football playoff a little bit, maybe give the Pac-12 some more breathing room because of sort of the lack of flexibility they have right now in trying to get a team into the playoff. So it's been years of this, and I think that Oregon will always continue to be a team, but I think until we get to see some more powerhouse teams in the Pac-12, it really does seem like it could just be the usual 2 or 3 teams in the conversation, but not necessarily the majority of the conference per se.
It does feel like every year in the Pac-12, there's a surprise team that makes a run, sometimes even to the Pac-12 championship game. You mentioned Colorado earlier, that obviously it's a small sample size. They're 2-0. They have a new head coach. Are they the team that you think might be this year the team to make a run potentially to the championship game or at least into the top 25?
Yeah, I think it's a team that has surprised for sure. I mean, not many people, I think at the beginning they thought, a lot of people thought that they were going to be at the bottom of the conference, and right now they're 2-0 with two good victories so far. But I think they're one of those teams that you give them credit for doing what they had to do in their first 2 games. You've had other South teams right now, like a Utah and Arizona State, that just haven't had. They just been the COVID-19 outbreak has hit them, and so. For Colorado, they've done what they had to do. They've had the games right now, and they've taken advantage. So I think they're a team that should be closely monitored, I'd say, and it helps that, again, as I mentioned, Utah and Arizona State not playing, so that, Colorado has gotten that exposure. They've gotten their games in. So it's really right, them and USC right now for that South title. I think it's pretty early. I'm not sure if, about a Pac-12 championship just yet, but from what we've seen so far, you got to give them the credit and the credit that they deserve so far.
We've mentioned some of the top teams. Is there any other team that fans should be keeping their eyes on in the Pac-12 that we haven't mentioned? I know the schedule's just been so strange with all these cancellations, and even you mentioned the Sunday morning game at the Rose Bowl last Sunday.
Yeah, no, it's been a whirlwind, as I've said, just as far as teams trying to schedule in and out games and all that, but. I think a Washington team is going to be a team that under their new head coach Jimmy Lake is a team that could really do some damage again. And we saw them this past weekend with a good win over Oregon State, but they got that just sort of ground and pound run game that can do it, and as far as as well as a good defense. So I think that's a team that also could be talked about and could be in the conversation as well as a team to not be. And I wouldn't say slept on, but just as far as just to keep an eye out for them, as a potential threat.
We kind of addressed this earlier with the Pac-12 and having that not a good national reputation, not getting teams in the playoff. And I feel like that transcends to the conference overall, not just in college football, but also in men's basketball, where they haven't had a lot of success. Is there somewhere that you can pinpoint the problem with the conference? Because I feel like we both followed high school sports in California. There's a ton of talent in the state, arguably the most talent basketball and football of any state in the country. What's the problem with the Pac-12 and that national reputation?
Yeah, and I mean it's a tough question because I think there's a lot of reasons that you could pinpoint as far as what the problem has been. But I think when you look at when you talked about basketball and you talked about football, but I think those two sports, as far as just what was the reasoning and what sort of what the problem was, I mean, you just didn't have. I mean, you didn't have a player really, I think, like break through. I feel like if that makes sense. It's just as far as breaking through and sort of taking the spotlight as far as taking the nation by storm. And I think it didn't help that the Pac-12 was pretty middling as far as basketball goes in the conference, as far as the record goes, and for football, it's been like this for this year a little bit too. So I think there's some questions to be answered there, and I think just as far as just consistency too, and trying to find sort of that team that can really fully dominate, or multiple teams that can fully dominate and sort of take the spotlight. Because if there's just really just one good team and the other teams are relatively good, I think that doesn't help your case as far as a program or as far as a conference goes, and promoting yourself and trying to make yourself recognized. So I think those issues could potentially be issues.
Yeah, I'm thinking of big name Pac-12 stars, and Marcus Mariota, which was a while ago at Oregon, and maybe Lonzo Ball in basketball, maybe DeAndre Ayton as well. There haven't been a lot of big names. I guess the one thing that I, growing up on the West Coast, maybe thought was an issue was there was just an East Coast bias, and ESPN and the conferences know they have more viewership on the East Coast in the SEC and the Big Ten, and they just want to focus on those conferences more. How much do you think that's a factor as now someone that works in Pac-12 media?
Yeah. East Coast bias is still definitely much a thing. And, you mentioned ESPN, you mentioned, just a lot of those, primetime kickoff games, for college football or so, they're mostly, those, mostly on the East Coast. Right. And I think for basketball, it's sort of the same thing as well. You have a lot of games also on the Pac-12 network, which don't necessarily get a whole lot of viewership or audience. So, I think it's just that I think that point that you made is just big name stars, the marketability as far as it goes is still much of a work in progress and development. And so, it's sort of time to see. And I think for basketball or so, what will be seen for the Pac-12 in the conference. And I know in basketball, they're trying to, do a larger conference schedule this year compared to previous years. So, it's definitely an East Coast bias. And I think, the Pac-12 games, the prime time though, when they've been shown, I think Arizona State, Oregon was one game that comes to mind that was on prime time last year. Not necessarily the best game prime time on paper, but it was one heck of a game. Arizona State coming out with the victory and shattering Oregon's playoff hopes. I mean, I think they have that potential. It just needs to kind of come into fruition a little bit more.
That game was a blast to watch, and I guess there's the Pac-12 after dark aspect that people talk about, but people aren't watching that. I mean, I mentioned that the Oregon State Washington game started at 11 o'clock at night. You had that incredible punt block by the Beavers that they returned for a touchdown, but it happens at 1 a.m. on the East Coast. No one's watching, so you kind of think that's a problem. And then I guess the other thing I think of as well is the Pac-12 network you mentioned, is owned by the Pac-12. Almost no one outside of the West Coast can get that channel. Well, SEC network, Big Ten network, owned by ESPN and Fox. So basically anyone in the country can get them. So it seems to me, mainly, if you really wanted to watch the Pac-12 on the East Coast, it's hard often to watch it, both in terms of time and then just in terms of the channel as well.
Yeah, I think you hit that on the nail. I mean, it's tough, man. I mean, the Pac-12 network, as far as, and just how exclusive it really is, as far as, just these, as far as just on the West Coast. I mean, it's not really the best way to really promote these teams as far as it goes. And so, and as you said, the late start times, you can make the whole hashtag Pac-12 after dark on Twitter. It's basically a meme, at this point, right? It's a meme, and just nobody's gonna want to watch on the East Coast. I don't blame you for 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. just trying to stay up. So I think there needs to be some solutions made, and I don't know if I have the answer to that, but it definitely is a prominent issue that has to be figured out. If they want, if they want the Pac-12 to get that exposure to an East Coast and those that live out there, right, and just kind of showcase their stars a little bit more too. So it is. I think we share relatively the same sentiment as far as the conference goes in that regard.
I think we both want to see the conference get more national exposure, and I don't want to get made fun of for supporting the conference here in Indiana. I'll add two more questions for you, Gareth. And one, you're just a student broadcaster, student journalist. What have been the challenges for you with COVID, with lack of sports, and how have you been dealing with them over the last couple months?
It's funny you asked that, because I was, for the student radio station, I was going to be doing play-by-play for the ASU versus Cal game on this past Saturday, this past weekend, and of course, I just mentioned that the game was canceled, and so we were actually going to be doing the game remotely in our studio, not in person. But I think just from these types of experiences and just doing there's a lot of Zoom interviews, right, and not much in person. It's just sort of the new normal that I'm getting used to, and a lot of my friends and classmates are getting used to. It's just a new normal that we're getting accustomed to, and I know it sounds cliche, but it really is. I mean, I don't think this is going to be going away anytime soon. I don't think Zoom interviews or these sort of remote types of media experiences. It's going to be like this I think for quite some time, until things really start to calm down and things start to really kind of get eradicated, I guess you could say. So it's definitely been challenging. It's having the masks on while doing broadcasting is a new thing, but it's just at this point you can't really complain too much. This is just kind of what we have to deal with, and honestly, it's a new experience. It's definitely something that's going to go in history books.
One final question for you, Gareth. I mentioned it before, a lot of excitement here in Bloomington about Indiana football. They're getting a lot of national attention. Head coach Tom Allen has been making the rounds on national media. What have you heard about Indiana football? What's your perception from being, thousands of miles away from Bloomington?
I love how the Indiana experts asking the ASU expert here in this question.
I mean, we just want to know what the I don't need a deep dive analysis of the offense or the Iowa State game, but I'm always curious to know someone out, especially outside of the Midwest, are they hearing about this team that has been, I don't know, maybe the story of college football this year?
I'm just giving you a hard time, Griffin, but no, yeah, the IU, from what we've seen, it's just a team that has really taken the nation by storm. And, when I look on Twitter and look on, ESPN or so, just, you see them pulling off these wins and just this run that they're going. And it is really quite impressive. I mean, I think by the beginning of this year, if you were to ask me if IU is going to be good, I probably would have said no. I don't know much about them, and I don't think they will be, but it is really quite to see them in the top 10 right now. And you mentioned the matchup against Ohio State. It's a big task, against Justin Fields and that Buckeye team. But I think, for the Hoosiers out there and for those fans, I'm sure they're very proud. I'm sure you guys, that fan base have been very proud and excited to see just sort of the momentum that they've built up. And really, I think the most exciting thing for IU football in probably a while, if I'm correct.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the best season you're looking at towards 1967, when the only time they went to the Rose Bowl, they lost to USC. O.J. Simpson was on that USC team. So it's been some time since Indiana was anywhere near up top the college football landscape. And well, I had a friend from California text me, and they said, after the Penn State game, I didn't even know Indiana football had a football team. I just knew they had a basketball team. So it's been something.
It's trying to change the norms, right? The basketball state now, maybe get a little bit of football in there. What do you know?
That's what been saying. The football state, Notre Dame, Purdue having good seasons. So it's been interesting here, and it's been interesting as well on the West Coast, Gareth. We appreciate you coming on today, bringing in some expertise, and hopefully giving a little bit more respect as well to the Pac-12 for our folks watching here in the Midwest.
Well, thanks for having me, Griffin. Always a pleasure to catch up with you, and good luck the rest of the way, man.
I appreciate it. Best of luck to you as well, and have a great Thanksgiving. That's coming up.
Thank you.
All right, that will do it today for our Unpaid Interns episode. Hope you enjoyed talking Pac-12 football with us. We will be back on Friday. We'll be 24 hours out from one of the biggest Indiana football games in a long, long time. We have a great guest coming on, Zach Osterman, the beat reporter for Indiana Athletics for the Indianapolis Star, will be joining us Friday afternoon at 1:30 live on our IU Sports Media channel. If you've missed any of our Unpaid Interns episodes, you can check them out on the IU Sports Media YouTube page or in audio form wherever you get your podcasts. That's going to do it for today's episode. For Gareth Kwok, I'm Griffin Epstein. We'll talk to you again on Friday.